All right, we're live. I think we're live, and I think I hear someone coming down the stairs, and now the person is crying. Good evening, everybody. How is everyone doing? Let's just make sure that the audio is good. Mic check. Okay, it's going to be an interesting stream tonight. As many of you may or may not know, Robert Barnes, genius that he is, who occasionally can't, figure out how his camera works on his computer, managed to get hacked on Twitter. And the F in the chat, audio is good. Okay, don't troll me with the Fs in the chat. Robert Barnes managed to get hacked on Twitter. And I say I'm smiling, but it's actually not funny. I never realized how invasive it actually is. Someone got a hold of his account, changed the name to it, and then repeatedly changed the name. And he has yet to be able to get it back, despite contacting Twitter support, Twitter security. We've been tweeting out at Jack, Twitter support, Twitter, all of them. Hasn't been able to get it back yet. Let me see if I hear. He can come down for right now because it's the intro. Okay, so there's that. So with any luck, Barnes hasn't lost his entire account. I don't know if people can delete all of your tweets once they get your account. And we're going to talk about it with Robert. Okay, here we got an unhappy kid who just made some slime. Okay, very quickly because we have to show them. Okay, slime. The best slime ever. Okay, now, you done it? Go, give it to Mom and get it. Okay, hold on one second. Go get this to her. Okay, so there's that. The big news of the week, well, okay, so there's been some news breaking. We're going to talk about Georgia. We're going to talk about Trump. We're going to talk about the upcoming January 6th. We're going to have some big news to announce. I'm going to wait for Robert to get here. And what else is on the menu? In Canada, I'm sure you all saw my video from today, but if you haven't, go check it out. It's an amazing situation where in Quebec, in particular, as you may have known from my other videos, on my second channel, Viva Family, if you haven't seen it, Quebec has recently locked everyone down. I say locked everyone down. They've shut down non-essential businesses from December 25th to January 11th. And anybody taking bets on whether or not it's going to be extended, if you're giving odds, I'll place the bet. I don't know if that's the way I want to say it. We can all reasonably anticipate this is going to get extended past January 11th, the same way everything has. They've shut down non-essential businesses. Don't know what that is. They have kept essential businesses open. Within those essential businesses, they have forbidden the sale through recommendation of non-essential items. None of it makes any sense. None of it makes any sense because it doesn't make any sense. They actually, at the pharmacy, as we call it here, Pharmaprix, they had batteries. They had batteries as non-essential items wrapped off with saran wrap, birthday cards, women's pantyhose, bras, tape, socks. They had socks wrapped off as non-essential items. You can go into the store. You can walk up and down the aisle. You just can't buy the stuff. At the dollar store, it was even more Kafka-esque. They didn't have it wrapped off, but you would take the item, and I have not seen this myself, but I've been told this by people I trust and believe. You go to the cash and it says non-essential item, you can't buy it. Okay, so that's what's going on in Quebec. The kid just knocked the lighting. There, a little bit like that. Okay, better. And so they've shut down non-essential businesses. They have restricted and declared unlawful private gatherings, while certain ministers or elected officials in Quebec go off to Bermuda, while in Ontario, made the news. I did a video about it. Rod Phillips posts on Twitter a pre-recorded stay-at-home COVID, thing's going to be different this year, while he is literally in St. Bart's. Oh, I've missed a couple of super chats. So that's what's going on in Quebec. Let me see here. Look for it going until June at least. No, it's. So the big then people were forbidden from having gatherings for New Year's and Christmas, and then in Gatineau, which is just on the border of Ontario, there was an unlawful gathering on New Year's of 6 people. Police were called, and the police showed up and things escalated quickly. We don't know exactly what happened before the recording started, but it went from apparently 2 police on scene to 6 to, apparently pepper spray, apparently, arrests. The video's there. I put a video out today. It is, regardless of how you feel about anything about all of this, and there's no undermining the seriousness of the situation. What is being done is both ineffective, borderline incompetent, and maddening to the general population, all the while bringing down the iron fist of the police force, all the while politicians themselves not abiding by it. Okay, with that said, someone asked, and I got the super chat from earlier, whether or not there are any election laws. I took a picture of it so that I don't lose it. We're going to get into it. But I cannot get over that was IT. Are there any international election laws? We'll get to it. They should have roped off non-essential at Target. All of us last year is US, to be fair. They should have roped off non-essentials at Target. All of last year is US, to be fair, to small non-essential businesses. So the rationale is that this is to be fair to small businesses that are shut down, so the ones that can stay open don't procure a benefit. The problem with that is they could have allowed curbside pickup or delivery or some other alternative method. As it is now, the only thing that's happening is Amazon is going to reap all of the benefits of this. And it basically just creates endless stress among all the other endless stress that's going on in the world and in life right now. So let's see here. Now, I'm not going to read all of them out loud, but I'm going to try to bring up as many, which brings me to the super chat monologue. California indefinite lockdown. Hope not. Viva Fry is my small amount of weekly sanity. Well, we were it's what can you do? I mean, we started off doing these streams as the distraction from the lockdown. That was, I feel like I'm in The Simpsons. That was 20 minutes ago. That was 10 months ago. That Washington Post full audio clip of Georgia Secretary of State leaked was a nothing burger. P.S. Check thermostat before Robert logs in. Your kid was fiddling with it. You say that, and I smelt the heater. Oh my God. Thank you. He turned it up to 29 and a half. I felt the board heater at my feet. It was nice. I was just wondering. Thank you. Who I can't see where that came from. Okay. So that's it. Now, the Secretary of State Raffensperger apparently recording a call with the president to leak it to the press makes no sense. It makes no sense. So let's see what we have here. Let's read some chats. Whoever you just saved me, like Malcolm, you saved me probably $40 on the next heating bill. Snitching on the kid. No, and speaking of snitching, this is the amazing thing. It's like whether it's deliberate, accidental, it doesn't matter. We've created an environment now where neighbors are snitching on neighbors for things that, for things that are arguably arbitrary in the first place. But in creating this obligation or this sense of requirement to snitch, you then start to moralize everything. Like, hey, someone who got the virus, how'd they get it? Who'd they see? What did they do? What rules did they break that brought that upon them, that pox upon their house? And then you end up having like fights where if you are inclined to forgive someone, if someone's on your side, okay, they got it. It's random. If someone got it who you don't really like, you immediately start to moralize the virus and how they could have gotten it, and they must have done something wrong, and they must have broken the rules. And it's crazy. But snitching on your neighbors, calling on your neighbors, getting the police to descend onto a house on New Year's Eve with 6 people in it. I mean, I don't know what we're doing here. In saying that people as intelligent as you, Mr. Fry, haven't picked up that this isn't incompetence, it's by design. Welcome to your new feudal technocracy. Well, I mean, I don't argue intentions. I know people think it. The whole thing about arguing intentions, and I see it in the chat, is that you're never going to be able to prove or disprove intentions. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the intentions are. It really just matters what the outcome is. It doesn't matter if what they're saying is true or false. It doesn't matter what their intentions are about saying it. It just matters if it's true or false. So that's it. Let's see here what we got. Snitching on your neighbors is the very heart and soul of tyranny. There was one more that I saw here. I saw something. Okay, so Robert is. I hope Robert is coming because he has had a stressful couple of days. Okay, let me see what we can do. Oh yeah, sorry. So standard intro. I had to post a comment this week because someone was faulting me for not having read their super chat. Thank you for the super chats. If I don't get to them, don't hold it against me. And if you're going to hold it against me, don't give the super chat because I can't bring up all the super chats. And I also, super chats are not a right of into the conversation. And there's certainly not an obligation for me to read an abusive or threatening or, nasty super chat just because it's a super chat. So with that said, nothing in this constitutes legal advice. And that's going to be it. So on the menu, if Robert ever gets here, if not, I'm going to have to talk about stuff that I can maintain a conversation for on my own. January 6th, there is a growing movement of now Republican senators who are going to challenge the electors, which Robert's going to explain the procedure. I know we've gone over it time and time again. And I'm like, I know when something doesn't click and then I know the day it clicks. So Robert's going to explain the procedure. We're going to talk about what's going to happen January 6th, the latest developments this week. We're going to talk about some tweets, whether or not they are bona fide threatening tweets, and even if they're not, whether or not they are bad idea tweets. We're going to talk about the Georgia situation and a bunch of other stuff. And now, with that said, if that is the real Robert, I see Robert. How you doing?
Good.
Okay, look, we got to start. Sorry, I'm going to bring this up here. 6,000 people watching, but only 800 likes. Smash that button. H7H, J59, H3F. This is going to turn into the best advertising for locals. And now, I got to tell you, I have my theories. Maybe this is all a setup by locals so that the reliability of their platform can be stressed and the benefits of the platform. You're a smart man, Robert. You're probably among the smartest people I've ever met. How do you get hacked? Do you mind telling us?
Yeah, so I mean, I have my suspicions as to the source, though I increasingly suspect some degree of Twitter complicity in all of this. So on Saturday, I got a direct message on Twitter from Twitter Help, or what appeared to be Twitter Help. And it said that they were going to suspend my account unless I objected to a copyright strike that they had made on my account. And here was where I had to go to make that objection, to respond. I click on the link, and I don't like the fact that it's a link that's asked me to log in again. And so I go back to the message and go to the message to confirm that this actually is Twitter Help. Go to the page, and it's a blue check mark, Twitter Help. So I was like, okay, I guess it is, and I better respond, or this will be their pretext to kick me off, though I was anticipating this happening sooner or later. And so then I go through that, and then like 2 minutes later, all of a sudden, I'm kicked off of Twitter, off of my account. So I go in, I figure out this must have been some kind of sophisticated hack. I go through the protocols I'm supposed to go to, and I change my password. I restore everything, make sure all the double authentication procedures are there, and everything seems fine. I do a couple of interviews on a couple of shows, come back, and I go to my Twitter account, and it's gone completely. It says there is no Barnes Law Twitter account. I'm like, what? And I go in to check my email, and there's an email from Twitter in Turkish that appears to be saying something about changing my password. I'm like, okay, so maybe they redid the hack or something else. Reach out to Twitter right away because I followed the protocols, and somehow they allowed whoever, if it's a hack, my email address on the account has been changed, my phone number on the account has been changed. They come back and they respond to me and they say there is no such account, number one. Number two, that account doesn't associate with your email or your phone number. I'm like, you guys are not supposed to allow this to happen in this manner. And I don't even understand how this happened when I went through the protocols to change everything. So kept trying to harangue them, and they refused to respond now for almost a day and a half. No human being has responded at all. They've taken no remedial action, no corrective action. And then I looked at what they did with the account. They didn't, like usually with hackers that are having fun, they just put a bunch of crap up on your account. That never happened. Instead, their whole obsession was making sure I couldn't reach my audience on Twitter. That was the whole goal. They kept the account, just changed the name, blocked access to it, didn't tweet from it, didn't Twitter email from it or anything else. And so it was odd. I was still also getting notifications of people who were DMing me up until late last night, which told me that Twitter was giving me false information in response. So but that's where it is right now. Twitter refuses to respond or help in any form, even though they promise contractually that they will to protect your account from being hacked if that's what happened. I have two clearly what we know, or what I currently know. One, the obsession was keeping me from communicating to people.
Well, not just that. Unless I'm mistaken, they went and deleted all your. I don't know how you do it, but it seems that they've deleted all your tweet history.
Correct. It doesn't exist anymore. And it removed. If you search for that account, a different account shows up. Someone else just set up once they figured out they had removed my name of the account, which before I was led to believe that couldn't happen by Twitter, but they also said that your email would never be disassociated from your account. So there's a lot of information that if Twitter wasn't complicit, they have serious systemic security flaws in their customer services. But yes, then they deleted all my whole history of anything I'd ever tweeted. And so whoever was doing it, I also, this is what I know. One, their focus was making sure people couldn't find anything I'd said and couldn't communicate to my audience on Twitter. The second objective is it appears I was specifically targeted and almost the only person targeted, because in researching this, no one else has had this kind of thing happen to them, where it was someone that appears to be Twitter help, somehow is blue check marked as Twitter help, was initial part of the process. And again, I thought I corrected that, and the person trying to hack was from New Jersey. 3 hours later, it's a Turkish source, and they let them do a bunch of stuff that they say can't be done. And so given the combination of those facts, my suspicions fall on two places. Either it's just a hack by someone who politically wanted me off, and it could be the Linwood QAnon world paying me back for my compliments of Lynn over that weekend, or it could be Twitter, or it could be both at some levels. I will probably bring suit against Twitter, because this is not Section 230 protected, failing to provide protect your account when you did everything Twitter said for you to do. But for the way it was, I've had people try to hack and phish and like all that before. Never had a problem, because I always refused to go, do it. What was unique here was it appeared to be a Twitter DM. Well, it was a Twitter DM. The only question is, how did they manage to look like Twitter? Did they hack Twitter before? Is Twitter complicit? That's the open question. But I think as a bigger matter, I've anticipated that this was going to happen by hook or by crook as soon as the election occurred, that there was going to be mass purges of people who were perceived as influential or effective by YouTube, by Google, by Twitter, and by Facebook. Facebook, frankly, has already been doing it now for a year. I think I have like 7,000 people that just follow my legal page. Almost none of them get notifications of anything I put up on the page.
Actually, someone asked here, and I haven't looked at this, but Dashin's rule: can you use the Wayback Machine, pick your tweets to show Twitter that you are the legit owner? Does Wayback Machine your tweets are all archived regardless? Like people have these tweets archived, so
Twitter
have evidence.
I've been through this before in different suits. Twitter has everything archived. You can't even delete. Like, the people believe you can delete your archive. You can delete your personal archive, but Twitter still has a copy of it. And so the net effect of it is that that guy. So he's got a natural expressive face. He's a great person. Now, I was watching the video of him catching that fish, his first fish.
It's amazing. It's amazing. He's got an expressive face, but it is as prone to extreme anger as it is to joy.
Yeah, I've noticed it. It's all forms of emotion. If he's unhappy with something, he makes that clear just in the facial expression within a quarter of a second. Would make a great actor, actually. That ability to be that expressive that quickly. But yeah. So, what I was telling people on our locals board was, this is inevitable anyway. I mean, here's my problems with Twitter. Number one, the way it monetizes itself is really surreptitiously by you're paying Twitter more than you pay a locals board. You just don't know it or fully appreciate it, because it's your private information that you're giving to them that is more valuable than, say, $5 a month on a locals subscription board. And of course, you can be part of a locals board without subscribing. So that's free for all of that component. But that's problem number one, the surreptitious method of buying your information without your full knowledge or informed consent. The second problem that a lot of people, the second problem everybody focuses on is censorship and suppression of information, selectivity in that censorship and suppression. But the third problem is one I think is underappreciated, which is the algorithmic manipulation. It was happening to me for the last year. On my own Twitter feed, I was not getting key people that I follow. Instead, I was getting bombarded with whomever Twitter wanted me to focus on, which interestingly enough tended to be a lot of QAnon sources for whatever reason, which is a bridge to that whole conversation.
Well, no, but my theory is that they're going to recommend anybody that's going to generate strife and disagreement because that's what generates action on Twitter. So they're more likely to recommend someone you're going to disagree with than someone you're going to agree with. I sort of noticed it on mine, but who's the Fox News woman with the blonde hair who went on a show? She left with O'Reilly. Oh God, what's her name? And they keep recommending her to me, and they keep recommending people to me, but I find that it's typically people, not necessarily people who I'm going to agree with, because that's not how Twitter gets the engagement that it wants. But that's my
there's that component, but it's also it's like, let's say you follow 1,000 people. The question is, how does Twitter, which of those 1,000 do they promote? And I'm discovering that they promote selective narratives. So, excuse me. So and they suppress other like, for example, I followed Don Jr. Unless I went to Don Jr.'s page, I was getting none of his tweets. That was frequently true of the president. Unless someone else retweeted the president, I wasn't getting the president's own tweets. So I had to go to his page to get them. The same was true of a wide range of the more influential. So if you were a Cernovich, a Posobiec, Don Jr., or the president himself, those were the ones that, even though they were the most popular people I was following on my Twitter feed, were not showing up in my Twitter feed. I had to go to their pages to find their materials. And of course, I've been shadow banned for 2 years now. So but that manipulation is very selective. And the key problem is the only thing that keeps Twitter afloat is the fact that we as content creators give it its power. And so sooner or later, we have to take that fuel away from Twitter. We have to find other places to go, because otherwise we're promoting Twitter and other people go to Twitter and they're getting algorithmically manipulated easier and more effectively because they're not even looking out for it. And as you know, just go to Robert Epstein's research, this dramatically shapes people's ideas about the world and what's happening. You can change elections, as may have just happened.
Yeah, or you can sensitize people to what they're doing in China, so that when it comes to North America, it's you've already seen it's deja vu, so you object to it less because, like whatever. I gave it in the intro, but
it's the critical component of it. So I wanted to get off of and divorce myself from Twitter sooner or later. Anyway, I figured they would do the job for me. And like I said, I've been the target of phishing. I've never fallen victim to it. And I don't know what, like here, the only reason why I clicked through the link was because it came from a Twitter help source and was blue check marked as a Twitter source.
And interesting. I mean, this is where Megyn Kelly is who I was thinking of. And they keep pushing Megyn Kelly. Not that I don't like her. I'm sure it might just irritate. Some of the tweets might irritate me, but this is where, Robert, I say sometimes knowledge is a curse in that you get traumatized from knowledge and not wiser from it. I can see you thinking right off the bat, oh, they're going to try to nail me on a copyright issue, so I better get to this quickly. And so anybody who wants to play into your psyche get at you knows exactly how to do it. It's like, okay, you're going to have an inkling, a reflex to say they're going to try to get copyright, so let me resolve it quickly. And that's how you get
definitely be. But what I don't understand is I fixed that rather quickly. How someone came back 3 hours later didn't make sense, because 3 hours later, they came back and hacked in my account and were able to change the password without knowing the password. That's what doesn't make sense. In other words, I figured it out quickly and was able to fix it. And so it doesn't make sense. And then the follow-up, different people's response was, some people said it's, the QAnon, Linwood world. But the other was if that Twitter was complicit at some level, or someone at Twitter was complicit. And at least the support for that is the fact that why has Twitter failed to respond for 36 hours? It's a violation of their own procedures to do.
Well, and it's not just that it's not that you're the most important person on earth. You're certainly someone with a requisite amount of influence that.
Oh, yeah, people like Jack Posobiec, people like Mike Cernovich, a bunch of people tweeted at Twitter support to do something. So they know, and they're just refusing to do anything. They're pretending they don't know. They're pretending they've never heard of me. They're pretending they don't know what this account is. It was like being in a real live movie Brazil. our first film reference.
I think someone dropped that reference in already.
You don't understand. You've never existed, in fact. But the way I see it is because of those problems with Twitter, which are fed by our own participation in Twitter. I mean, that's the problem. We, our content creators, help feed it. And I stayed on Twitter because of who followed me. It wasn't just like numbers, because there are other ways to replace those numbers, but it was a matter of, Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, a bunch of people in the White House, a bunch of congressmen, senators, their aides, almost every Fox News producer, so on and so forth. And that's why I think I was targeted, was for that reason. Whether it was it was an unusual form of hack and an unusual form of phishing. It was unusually sophisticated, if that was it. But like I said, that part was fixed. How did they hack it again 3 hours later without knowing the email and without knowing the password, when all of that was blocked? That I've seen no explanation for it, and then did things that Twitter said couldn't be done. I will probably sue Twitter just for the fun of it, just to find out what happened, and maybe they'll come back with the defense of actually that they're protected by Section 230 because they did participate in it, or they'll come back or they will need to fix it because then it's a consumer violation. Either way, though, I've wanted to divorce from Twitter at some point. Figured they would facilitate the process because we need to start providing our content to boards that will protect our content and that will protect free speech. And that's the reasons why, that's the reason why we created the locals board, the Viva barneslaw.locals.com. The reason, and what it is now they've just accelerated my timetable is really all that happened. Whoever was behind it, that's all they did. And there's ways I can stay in touch with the influential followers. That's not a problem. In fact, they're encouraging more direct communication. Well, good by me. I'll be in DC this week. So for just that purpose. But we'll go ahead and start with more activity on our locals board, providing some of that curated content. And what it is, on the locals board, I'll focus more on sort of in-depth discussion on, say, 4 or 5 topics or stories a day. And there'll be 1 or 2 that will be for subscribers. The rest will be just for everybody who's on the board. And I already had a Parler account. I'll use Parler the way I used to use Twitter, as an internal curational tool for stories, notes, and ideas. But we'll probably focus more heavily on locals, especially. Because I think that we need these independent free locations that can support independent free speech. And why provide my content and help monetize and support Twitter? That didn't make sense to me long term. Once it became clear they were no longer going to be the free speech wing of the free speech party, but the suppression wing of the suppression party.
Okay, well, with that is the best non-ad for locals anybody can get. Let's get into the subject matter for the week. I think, well, let's start with the big one. Okay, so January 6th is coming up. There has been a movement now growing, or at least gaining some support. Ted Cruz, Hawley, who else am I going to miss? A bunch of senators now are getting on the contesting, objecting to the Electoral College bandwagon. So I mean, I think I understand it. We keep talking about it, but it's not a bad idea just to review it again. What's going to be the process for the objections? How does it work the day of? Does anything have to happen before the 6th? What happens on the 6th? And then what is likely to happen on the 6th itself?
So there's really a kind of an open question about that in part. So here's what the Electoral Count Act provides for. The Electoral Count Act, which is Section 15 of Title III of the United States Code, anybody can look that up. You just put 3 USC 15 in and it will come up with the Cornell or one of the other law statute sites. And what it provides for is that they meet on January 6th. It's the new Congress, the new House members and the new senators. It's unclear if the 2 new Georgia senators will be there because their election may still be in dispute. And then but then the question will be whether the existing senators are there until the new senators are there. That is an open question. But it's the newly elected Congress plus Vice President Pence, who under the law, under the statute, is the presiding officer. He as the president of the Senate. They meet together in the House of Representatives chamber. They meet and convene at 1:00 p.m. Eastern time, DC time, in the House chambers on the 6th. At that point, the tellers, which are these kind of administrative clerks of the Congress, gather these certificates that have come in, and there's an open question about what certificates will be there. Will it only be Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, there's some kids playing piano upstairs, but I'll leave it off. The certificates are what, the stated electors?
So yes, so the and I'll go back to what that is in a second. But
Okay.
so it's unclear which the certificate. These are the certificates from the Electoral College who have sent that in on the date that they voted, December 14th, and sent it in to the president of the Senate. That's who it's being sent to, being held by the vice president's office until time to open them. The tellers are the ones who administratively open them. There is a protocol for them to read them out and then give it to the vice president. There's some protocol that just gives it to the vice president and he reads them out. And then at that point, depending on how they do it, their Congress has some flexibility on their rules about the timing of objection. They can either ask for objections then under the Electoral Count Act, or they can wait for the reading of all of the electors from all of the states and then have objections from all the different states. So usually it is when they announce the electors, someone raises an objection. If the objections have to be under the Electoral Count Act, have to be in writing, and so a House member or however many House members join in, but all it's necessary is one member of the House, one member of the Senate object to any state's electors. And at that point, that triggers under the Electoral Count Act that the Senate goes back and debates it for 2 hours, whether or not those electors should be counted. And the House does the same. Each chamber votes and reports their votes. Under the Electoral Count Act, if both states sustain the objection, then those electors are thrown out. If both states say, no, there's no problem with the objection, then those votes count under the Electoral Count Act. Now I'll get to the constitutional question about all this.
Okay,
but
wait.
Then go ahead.
Right there, though. The objection is, I'm not on mute. Okay. The objection itself, is there any formality to the objection, or is it raise a hand objection? Do you have to state a basis? Do you have to provide
Just in writing? But no other details. It's just in writing. I, Congressman so-and-so, object. I, Senator so-and-so, object. That's it.
And then the extent of the debate on that is the 2-hour debate. There, what evidence is presented? What documentary evidence is required?
That's up to their internal rules. So currently the Electoral Count Act only provides for 2 hours. There is some suggestion that McConnell and Pelosi are moving to change the internal rules to make it harder for objections to be heard, harder for objections to have evidence presented, shorten the time frame, all of that. There's rumors of that. I don't think McConnell will go forward with that. That looks even more embarrassing now that multiple senators have joined. There is a constitutional question as to whether the Electoral Count Act is itself constitutional. That's what Congressman Gohmert filed his suit. Now, he sued Vice President Pence. There's some dispute about whether he could have sued Congress. No shock. The court says, of course, no standing. And if he doesn't have standing, who does? If a congressman saying the Electoral Count Act is unconstitutional, we need to have a remedy. We need clarity prior to the count as to how this is constitutionally supposed to be done. And Gohmert's position was, if you read the Constitution, then the only person who has power to count the electors and to determine any contest concerning the electors is the president of the Senate, who's the sitting vice president. The historical argument in favor of that, well, first you can start with the originalist and the textualist argument. The Constitution has no explicit role for Congress to count or object to electors. It only states that the president of the Senate shall open the certificates in the presence of members of the House and the Senate, and then the vote shall be counted. Now, one can argue about that second clause, the vote shall be counted clause, but here we have historical interpretation. First, right at the time after the Constitution was passed, they included in legislation, the law was that the president of the Senate would count the electors. So we have what they thought at the time. We have contemporaneous evidence from an originalist perspective. Next, we have what John Adams actually did. In 1796, the electors from Vermont, there was a close dispute in which if the electors from Vermont were thrown out, Jefferson would be elected president, not Adams. Adams was the sitting vice president, so he was the presiding president over the Senate. The guy who came up with the idea to challenge Vermont's electors was Alexander Hamilton himself, which all these lefties love with their little Hamilton musical. So it was Alexander Hamilton that came up with all these some of these ideas, folks. For all these press people are like, we've never heard of this. This is outrageous. This is some sort of seditious coup. It's been here since the beginning of our country. In 1796, John Adams it was up to him. Hamilton said, look, the Vermont legislature, and by the way, it wasn't an objection about what Vermont's legislature actually wanted or what its voters would have wanted. It was agreed that they chose Adams. There was no dispute about that at all. That was Adams' stronghold area in the Northeast. But the way they went about it procedurally was the question, that because the manner and method under the electors clause was for the legislature to pick, and the manner the legislature picked was not considered legislative action under their own state constitution. See if these arguments sound familiar. Alexander Hamilton said, this is almost identical to the arguments about Pennsylvania that Texas brought, and to Wisconsin. Almost everything in the Texas suit was parallel to what Alexander Hamilton said was an unconstitutional electors in 1796. So they brought it up. A bunch of legal scholars at the time, jurists brought it up, legal academics. So it goes to John Adams. They form, and John Adams, and he was going to decide his own presidency. So it's like they say, oh, there's a conflict of interest with Pence being involved. There was a real conflict of interest with John Adams being involved. He was deciding whether he wins or his opponent wins. John Adams gets up there, and what do you think he does? He says, I'm going to count Vermont because Vermont voted for me. And nobody in the House or the Senate objected. It's not clear whether he really gave them a chance to. There's an interpretation from the diary that because of how long he sat down, that meant he was letting them object, but he never calls for an objection. And that's how Adams was our first truly contested elected president, got in because of his own interpretation that he had the power to determine which electors were legitimate and which ones were not. Then that's repeated in 1800. And in Thomas Jefferson, what happened is the electors from Georgia sent in a real squirrely ballot that was not consistent with what would count as and as lawyers, we understand the significance of these kind of things. What makes a document authentic? What makes a document certified? What makes a document trustworthy to be outside of the hearsay rules? The Georgia electoral certificate didn't get close to that. It didn't match it at all. It was completely inconsistent. So by law, most scholars that have looked at it, you can find it still in the National Archives, the old document, did not conform. And the problem was, if those electors were not counted, Jefferson was going to be in a 5-man runoff in the House, and he wanted a 2-man runoff in the House. And a 5-man runoff, he knew he was probably going to lose. So what do you think old Tommy did? He got up there and said, up, Georgia electors count. And he didn't give even a little breath for anybody to voice an objection. He was moving on, by golly. So that's the history of it.
But now, okay, so going back to the procedure a little bit, and I'm gonna digest that history. A senator raises an objection. Does it have to be seconded by somebody else? And if so, does it require a rank?
So one interpretation, like if it was to go to this objection issue, one interpretation is no objections matter. That Vice President Pence gets up there and he says, Arizona's electors are contested, they're out. Or he says, from Arizona, we have 2 sets of electors, because that changes the consequence of an objection. Under the Electoral Count Act, all that has to happen is they make an objection. They don't have to say what their objection is. Just it has to be a House member and a senator join, and they debate it for 2 hours. And that the both chambers have to sustain the objection for the electors to be thrown out under the Electoral Count Act.
Both have to sustain in order to to not count the electors. They're going to count all the uncontested electors, but they throw if both
chambers reject.
Okay, and if one chamber does and one chamber doesn't.
That's where there's a dispute. The statute's not well written. Okay. So let's say here right now under the Electoral Count Act, if there's only one set of electors that are read out, like Arizona, Vice President Pence says 11 for Joe Biden. Under the Electoral Count Act, both chambers have to object for those electors to be thrown out. Otherwise, whomever the governor has certified goes in. Second possibility is that instead what Pence does is he says there's 11 for Biden and 11 for Trump. There's a contest based on Arizona electors have sent or Trump electors have sent theirs in. Now, under the Electoral Count Act, it says you're only supposed to count the electors that have been certified by the governor. But nothing in the Constitution requires that. And in 1876, it was a competing state legislature that sent it in. It was not the recognized body for certifying electors that sent in the contested electors, and they did count those electors as contested. So there is historical precedent for Pence to say there's 11 for Trump and 11 for Biden. In that context, they go with the governor's certification unless both chambers object.
Okay, and someone had just asked a question. I was going to ask it. Is it a simple majority? Is it +1? Is it a supermajority?
Just a majority and a majority of quorum. So if somebody doesn't show up, that can change the numbers. I mean, to give an idea, The biggest contest that really took place, we've only had one real fierce contest. Now, we've had objections. Congressmen started objecting after the 1808 election. They objected in 1808. They objected to 1812. They objected to 1820. They objected to 1836. They objected to 1856.
And so, actually, let's stop right there. When you say they object, how many objections are they objecting to? One state, or is it like objecting?
Some cases, one state. Some cases, two states.
Okay.
In the case of 1876, four states. 1876 is the most analogous. But 1872, there was also an issue about electors from multiple states. Horace Greeley had died after the election. And the question was, could those electors felt obligated to vote for him? A bunch of House and Senate members said, no, you can't vote for a dead guy. And that you have to replace him. So that was multiple states. There was also, and objections have been raised because states voted that weren't yet recognized states at the times they voted, hadn't been admitted to the Union yet. States also voted in ways that they said they voted by ballot, but they actually voted by some other method, or the ballot was in question. So the kind of objections you're hearing, we've had objections to either by the vice president as president of the Senate, or by members of the House or the Senate, or by outside legal scholars, including framers and founders of the Constitution, going all the way back to 1796. And Congress members have been objecting since 1808. And have objected to over 10 presidential election contests.
Okay, actually, next question. So they've objected. We'll get into the bases of the objections, or we've gone over it. Have they ever thrown out a slate of electors after a successful objection, although with or without consequence to the election?
Often, frankly, the record is unclear, because what has happened in all these other elections is they were not decisive. So in 2004, they held a whole vote, because that would have been decisive, where the Democrats challenged George W. Bush's electors from Ohio on the grounds that the machines and statistical anomalies, much weaker evidence than presented here, invalidated his election. A vote occurred, and they did not sustain the objection, so the electors counted for George W. Bush. But in almost every other context other than 1876, they have not overturned any actual election. Now, there's some votes that appears they did invalidate a bunch of states, but the record is unclear. Like, what tends to happen is the House and Senate, they bring an objection, they argue, they debate, they say we'll deal with it at the end, and then they didn't deal with it at the end.
They don't deal with it because they've already reached the threshold of 270, and it's academic.
Correct. Exactly. So the ideas of objection are not new. These interpretations of the Electors Clause are not new. The idea of the vice president asserting unilateral control over who could determine it is not new either. So theoretically, the other thing Vice President Pence could do is, let's say he says there are no qualified electors from the state of Arizona. Then under the Electoral Count Act, the House and the Senate could object, but then both would need to overturn his ruling. That's where whatever Pence does is, when people were talking about the Pence card, Pence had by far if there was a Hail Mary, the Pence card was the Doug Flutie Hail Mary. If he stepped up to the plate. Now, I personally don't think he will, but my point was that constitutionally he was absolutely entitled to do so. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had no problem doing so, and that's as good a historical precedent as you could possibly find. And that if he was truly this originalist and this textualist and this Trump supporter that he claims to be, he would. I have no doubt that if the roles were reversed and this was Joe Biden in 2012 and Obama was contesting the election, that he absolutely would have. People have pointed out that Richard Nixon also exercised this power. The other significance, by the way, of the 12th Amendment that also gives the president of the Senate this power is it was passed after Adams and Jefferson had done what they did. And there was a lot of debate and discussion about it at the time and afterwards. And so the 12th Amendment was passed in 1803 to be enforced by 1804. And it used the exact same language that was in the Constitution that both Adams and Jefferson had relied upon for saying the president of the Senate can do whatever he wants when it comes to this issue. People can argue whether it's a good idea, but it's what the Constitution provides for and what the historical precedent supports. And what an originalist and textualist approach would validate. So, but I don't think he will, in fact, exercise this power. But if he does, that changes the equilibrium. And there's an argument that neither the House or the Senate can override him, that whatever Pence says is final.
If he were to do that, I mean, I could picture it descending into the same chaos we've seen in other countries where, like, there's actual physical fights between congressmen and senators. Like, that'd
be some great drama. You got to line them up like it would be what Nancy Pelosi maybe against AOC. That'd be a great little fight. The young cat fight, young versus old cat fight. See if Pelosi's wig holds.
I can't see from what I understand.
Who would Maxine Waters fight? That would be great. Maxine Waters against maybe Tulsi. Oh, that would be unfair. Tulsi Gabbard would kill her. But we have to line up who would be the good fights to witness, because that'd be a great. Well, what better way to finish 2020 than a fight on the congressional floor, Filipino style, like the Philippines got into last year?
Well, I was thinking more Eastern Europe, where they were throwing chairs. I think it was.
Oh yeah, that'd be good too. But there's no chairs. Everything's locked down.
Well, okay. So no hope
for that reason.
So J Mill says, what's the chance that Senator Cruz gets his 10-day stay to audit the 6 states?
Brilliant idea, by the way, by Senator Ted Cruz. And it's maybe not a coincidence that the only state who had both of their senators support it is the great state of Tennessee. I've been pointing to this for a while, which is that the best, and thanks to everybody on the locals board and elsewhere who sent in that letter, because this letter was basically calling for a version of that. The letter was saying, please, for good cause, we didn't lay out this specific procedure, because it's best if people like Cruz like to take credit for this. So, congratulations to him. It's a great idea. But it was great because what the letter's point was, it's much easier to get a House member and senator, and it was never going to be a problem in the House. It was going to be the Senate, to object if their objection is not, I'm throwing out votes. If instead their objection is, let's make sure we have an independent investigation that vets the facts using historical precedent. And 1876 is a perfect historical precedent. By the way, they were planning on this in 1800. In 1800, the Congress was proposing a commission just like this. So it actually has a longer history. But the Federalists were trying to screw Thomas Jefferson, and they were trying to create a commission that would basically shaft people off. So so that's where this sort of stems from. But the Cruz's idea is a fantastic idea, because now, instead of voting yay or nay on throwing out votes, they're voting yay or nay on whether or not to have a simple commission to simply investigate. And if you're up in 2022 and you're a Republican, how do you vote against that? Right? It's one thing to say, I don't want to participate in validating Trump's claims, and I don't want to get into the Powell and the Wood stuff and all that stuff. But it's quite another to say, I'm scared of a 10-day bipartisan commission that just investigates and reports back. And a commission that historically that method has always been an establishment kind of method. But it's one that would at least increase confidence in the election. So brilliant idea by Senator Cruz, and brilliant to my 2 Tennessee senators stepping up to the plate. Good to see that. And I think it puts everybody in a bad position. I think he'll get a lot more votes now. There'll be I don't think he'll get to 50, unfortunately, because that's still uphill. There's still always hope. But it's going to be uphill, because you know what Romney's going to do. You know what McConnell's going to do. You know what some of them are going to do. So and then, of course, the Democrats control the House. But it's also put some Democrats in a bind. If you're a Democrat and you want to look reasonable and fair, why not vote for the commission? Because then you can say, hey, I voted for a commission. The commission came back and supported whatever. So it's a great move by Cruz. It's been in the works for a little while. And it's great to see. And so I think it gives Trump a fighting chance. Still a long shot, but it's a long shot from the 30-yard line rather than your own 30-yard line. But
when does that 10-day delay start from, end from, and then what will be the procedure after?
It would happen on the 6th. So the goal is it would set it up by the 7th, and then it would come back and report by the 17th. And the House and the Senate would vote on the 18th and the 19th prior to Inauguration Day on the 20th. And again, this is what happened in 1876. Now, back then they had 2 months for Inauguration Day. I think they should reconsider and have our Inauguration Day be in March. We know what Democrats would do in this situation, because they did it in 1876. In 1876, the vice president was a Republican, was going to make his own unilateral rulings from the bench, if you will, as presiding over the Senate, about which electors counted and which didn't. And the House said, we're not going to allow any count to occur. And they filibustered for 2 months. So they created the commission, because they was the only option to deal with the filibuster. When they came back with the results from the commission, the House went back and started filibustering because they didn't get what they wanted. So you see how Democrats play this game. Republicans are just, they're corrupted is the reality. The Republican establishment is corrupted. And but that's the other utility. Make everybody vote so the whole world and Trump supporters can see who's clean and who's corrupt, because it's the next stage of what needs to take place anyway. I mean, put it this way, if they're so corrupt, they won't allow even a single commission to form. How much do you think Trump would have got done in the next 4 years? with that many corrupt actors in the House and the Senate.
Well,
Wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, at least it would have been a different type of manifestation of the corruption. But so Senator Cruz, he puts forward this idea. What is there a debate on the proposal? Does it come first? Does it come as one of the objections or the first objections? And if it doesn't go through, then what happens?
So basically it's a proposal as part of the objection. What it really does is it puts maximum pressure on the most number of people to object. It puts maximum pressure on McConnell and the Democrats to reconsider at least allowing the commission to form. If they don't allow the commission, don't authorize the commission, then it just goes to the vote. And if they're not willing to authorize the commission, then you can fairly infer they're not going to throw out the ballots in favor of Trump.
Fair enough.
But again, then it goes back to the vice president. He could still take action then. There's an open question. What happens if the vice president just declares, here's the final vote? Because here's what the law is. Whoever he declares is final. And this is one of my favorite little tidbits of the U.S. Constitution that's separate from this. Years ago, I was at a Hollywood director's house. He was sitting there on this huge bed debating all these topics. He had a bunch of legal issues. He's now passed on. So it was amazing. He believed some very interesting theories. Like he was in Linwood territory. But I told him, I said, here's a little theory that you probably haven't heard of. Did you know that the Archivist of the United States can probably constitutionally and legally declare himself the king of America and disband the Congress and every other branch of government and put the military under his exclusive control? And he's like, oh, you're totally crazy, which was funny. It'd be like Lynn Wood calling you crazy. But it was one of those loopholes that actually Einstein's genius that he brought over almost disqualified himself from citizenship, because during his citizenship exam, he started going through all of the inherent flaws, potential problems in the Constitution. But what it is this. Well, years ago, there was an issue about whether the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, and other amendments were constitutionally passed. Congress has said that they will allow the Archivist of the United States to declare which amendments had passed. Now, theoretically, he's just an administrative clerical guy, right? And he's someone you can trust and rely upon. He gets back who voted and who didn't vote, how the states voted, and so forth. But in the end, a bunch of people challenged it because they said the Archivist got it wrong. There are a bunch of states that didn't pass it under the meaning of the Constitution, these different amendments. Some states because there was issues about whether the legislatures were properly formed because it was post-Civil War. Others because of issues with how the income tax thing went through, where legislatures appeared to vote on something different than the 16th Amendment. So but because of that, it goes to courts, and the courts are like, we can't get involved. Whatever the Archivist says is final. And so what this does is theoretically, what it does is it creates a hole. The Archivist of the United States could say, there's been a new amendment, and it declares the Archivist as the king. And it's good to be the king in Mel Brooks' phraseology. And now Congress has suspended everyone else. The military's under my command. Let's go. Theoretically, now we all know the courts would suddenly rediscover standing and rediscover involvement in that circumstance. But it's theoretically a problem. The same is true here. On paper, whoever the vice president declares is the president under the law. It's kind of a hole in the system, but it's how it's written literally and textually.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I think it's so unlikely and implausible that
but imagine if it was reversed. If this was Biden and Obama, would we have more doubt? If this was Harris and Biden, say 4 years from now, would we doubt that Harris or a Biden would exercise this power in their name?
I would flip it the other way. I think they would just go through the more tenable procedures in the Constitution, and they'll have their objections. They will throw them out after the objections, and then they'll get that way they'll get to the same results without looking like it is.
That's what they would try to do. But let's say it was their only option. And let's say it's Obama, and he's the first black president, and it's been stolen from him by these corrupt, crooked Republicans using absentee ballots, no less, which is what the New York Times was predicting in August of 2012 when it talked about the dangers of mail-in balloting. They thought Romney was going to steal it from Obama. I don't have much doubt that Biden would step into the breach. I agree with you. It would be highly controversial no matter what, because most people in the country are unaware of this. They're unaware of how our constitutional process resolves election disputes.
And Rick Chietta, put out a short video today talking about, and everyone sees the media talking about sedition, treason. The irony is, when anyone was using those words 4 years ago, they were called, they were mocked out of the public square. Now it's the media using those words without any idea of what they mean, without any idea of the Constitution, as I have learned it through not only from you, but from others. No idea what's in there. And so when you don't know what's in there, it's all new and it's all shocking to you.
Yeah, and people forget our history. I mean, like I said, John Adams did this in 1796. And in fact, there was internal discussion about objecting to it after the fact. But what both Thomas Jefferson said and his critics said after he did it in 1800 was they said, well, our country's too young. We don't want a pseudo president. We're going to, no matter how this vote comes down, we're going to have half the country is going to see the president as a pseudo president. So, and in my view, I blame a lot of it on the courts and on the executive branches. They could have done a meaningful investigation just to sort of briefly bridge into the phone call between the president and that corrupt Rad Ratzenberger.
Before we even get there, someone had asked a question about Georgia, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find it again. I noticed some chat. Oh, here we go. How long could both Georgia Senate seats be contested? Sorry, that's a different question. Do you want to answer this one now that I pulled it up? How long?
It could be contested all the way past January 20th.
Okay, and now,
I assume it won't be, but who knows? I mean, in Georgia, the president has filed a fantastic election contest. The court, under state law, had to schedule it within 10 days, a full hearing within 20 days. It has failed to even assign a court judge to the proceeding. And the Georgia Supreme Court, even though they're supposed to be enforcing the rules, said, we don't have jurisdiction yet. Of course they don't, right? They all don't have jurisdiction, no standing, ripeness, mootness, all this hogwash. The courts, number one, it's done two things. One, it's made the courts look really bad in the court of public opinion. And secondly, it's forced this position. Like if I was in Pence's position, now the reason why I know Pence isn't going to take action is because he hasn't been preparing the ground for it. If Pence 3 weeks ago would have come out and said, I'm not going to count electors from states that don't have an honest election contest proceeding adjudicated, do you think all of a sudden these states would suddenly feel the need to have hearings?
I'm bringing up Cleopatra, said Mike Pence. If you're watching, listen carefully. I promise to support you bigly if you do this. Cleopatra, thank you very much for the super chats, as always.
A lot of people are going to be surprised at how weak Mike Pence really is.
I don't see him doing it. I don't see him doing anything, not because of him as a weak individual, but just rather the context is one which it would just be. Don't want to use any inflammatory words. It would just be nobody would tolerate it. And you have enough Republicans who would not tolerate it and say, look, it's just doing it for his friend. And this is total corruption, authoritarianism. They have to go through some sort of procedurally appropriate remedy.
Here's where I would, I mean, I can see that interpretation, especially at this stage. My view is this. I believe Pence had the constitutional power to do so. What he should have been doing if he planned on exercising this power is preparing it for a month in public dialogue and saying, look, here's my duties. I can't certify a fraudulent election. So what I will do is I will only count the electors from those states that meet the standard of a transparent election. And that requires you comply with the United States Elections Assistance Commission's rules for an election about canvassing and counting of ballots. And you make sure there's an honest, independent review and monitoring of those ballots. Party observers are present in the counting process and the canvassing process and the signature match process, and making sure there's not more votes than voters, as appears to be the case in Pennsylvania, for example. They apparently certified more votes than voters, according to the Pennsylvania state legislature. So but he didn't. And that was a sign that he had no interest. And then he goes in and begs the judge, please don't make me do anything the Constitution might make me do. Please dismiss the case on lack of standing ground. And here's the problem with that. A congressman is suing, asking the judicial branch to get involved because the issue is that Congress itself has no incentive to recognize the Constitution's limits on their own power. Why would Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi or any House or Senate say we want to give up our power to either the vice president or give up our power to the House voting by state delegation? And there are constitutional interpretations that's how the vote should be. Any contested issue of whether an elector's vote should be counted, in my view, should be done either by the president of the Senate as vice president or by the House voting by state delegation, one of the two, because that's what the Constitution provided for. If we want a different remedy, amend the Constitution for it.
Okay, and now this is the question I saw in the chat earlier, just about I know we've talked about it a dozen times, the Georgia audit where they were recounting the ballots, and the argument was that it's not going to make any difference if you recount the ballots. And then there was the question of the signature verification on the Georgia ballots. So can you explain the process for that? And I mean, does it stand anywhere different now, or is Georgia basically just going to go to the objection state when they meet up on January 6th?
Well, you get a sense of the bad faith of Ratzenberger, the Secretary of State there, that he has a call with the President of the United States, which a bunch of lawyers are on that call, including Cleta Mitchell, who's fantastic, by the way. I haven't mentioned her before, but since she's publicly identified on that phone call, she's a fantastic lawyer. Try to do great work for the president during all of this, despite a lot of other people giving bad advice in the process. And what does he do? He leaks the call and does a misleading interpretation of the call. All Trump does, he goes through, he goes, look, I won this election. I have no doubt I won this election. I think you, as a Secretary of State, criminally violated the law and have certified a fraudulent election. You haven't allowed for independent, meaningful monitoring of anything. You played games with what you've been doing, and all I need to do is to find 11,880 votes, and I get declared the winner, or at least it's in doubt, and it goes to the House. And how does Ratzenberger leaks it to the press? Well, one, he records it, probably without notice to anybody. Gives you a sense of, would you record a call with the President of the United States without telling?
And I'm going to try to listen to the entire recording, because from what I understand,
it's more than an hour.
Yeah, from what I understand, it's out of context. It's
completely.
But I heard you got the word in my head. Ratzenberger's name.
Isn't that great? I got the name stuck in your head. You're never going to think of him again without thinking of Rat.
No question. But I heard his voice. His voice was one of the, what's the word? The fake sort of calmness and arrogance when you know that you're recording a conversation and the other person doesn't. But who does it? We've talked about it. I think recording conversations, especially if you leak them as opposed to use them as evidence when someone accuses you of something far different, it always looks bad. He leaked a call with the president to hostile media to build the argument that the media is running with now of treason and sedition. It's dirtier than anything. It's not just like it's not
for people to know, there was nothing problematic with what the president said on that call. What he said is he laid out. He said, "Here's all my grounds, and all I got to do is find more than 11,880 votes, and I want you to have somebody independent investigate this because I believe that's what they will find." And the media interpret that, is he told him to find fake votes? That's completely false. Politico is lying. CNN is lying. The media, Washington Post is lying. That's what they do. They lie. And the reason why, people like Twitter don't want me around is they prefer those liars be the ones that you see. Google prefers those liars be the ones you see. Try to research election fraud. All they'll do is give you, quote unquote, fact checks from a bunch of liberal media sources. You have to increasingly go to DuckDuckGo. And that's part of the future, is weaponizing independent sources of technology to fight back against the big tech censors. But yeah, so and what the president just laid out because they have not done an independent audit. They did a bogus audit of one county, and they said magically they had the highest signature matches in history. Again, everybody tells me that these are fine. Why won't they let anybody independently confirm this? They would not. One county in one swing state will let anybody look at the ballots or let anybody look at the signatures. If there's no problem with them, what are they so scared of? So the idea that these are clean is nonsense. The rat there knows that's the case. There'll be some post-election remedies that we're going to pursue in some of those cases that we're going to be starting with an election integrity project to go after some of these corrupt election officials. But there's only so much that can be done now. And unlike what Lynn Wood has been saying, there is no criminal proceedings against these guys. There's no military tribunals coming. That's the problem. Why do you think the President of the United States has to beg the Georgia Secretary of State to just do his job? Okay. And instead, the call gets taped and then illicitly leaked and then improperly discussed and decontextualized, and lies are made about what the president said.
The fact that anybody does this, the fact that an elected official does this to the president, and it's like, and the media doesn't think twice about running an inaccurate or spun story.
They would have never done this to Obama. If someone would have taped it and recorded, they would have never leaked it. They would have never discussed it if it was leaked. And if it had been leaked and had been discussed, they would completely justify Obama's actions.
Okay, now the question is, in Georgia, on the signature verification, what was the process? What was done, and why is it unsatisfactory? Because there was some heated debate in the early stages before we got here that what if Georgia was all fine and dandy, and others saying no, what Georgia did, there was no signature verification, and what they recounted was basically just recounting what would have been a done mistake already.
The Secretary of State's office agreed with me when we were down there that the United States Election Commission, which was formed after the 2000, an independent commission formed by Congress, that they've written detailed procedures and guidelines for how an election is to take place. The OECD, that monitor that does protocols for international election observers, and the Election Integrity Project out of Minnesota, which includes a bunch of secretaries of state, that those procedures, recognized by all of them, required that party observers independently confirm the signature matches. And he had already promised in 2018, when he wrote a $106 million taxpayer check to Dominion, that the next time there was any kind of dispute about an election, he would print all of the ballots because they're all digitized and scanned. It takes one hit of a button to do so. He admitted that both of those things were what all of the procedures and guidelines in the United States and internationally required. It's what he himself had promised. He agreed he was going to deputize me and 6 other people to act as the process of independently confirming the signatures. And instead, he refused. He is not, to this date, the election contest suit is filed against him. He has refused to participate in the suit. He's refused to help provide documents and information. He's refused to ask for a judge to be assigned the case, knowing this is the reason why that call took place. The call took place is because he's been stonewalling on these discovery items. And that's where, I mean, all Trump did was go through the detailed, and a lot of independent people who are otherwise skeptical of some of the election contests, people like Will Chamberlain and others, said the Georgia election contest was clearly a very strong and valid election contest. And so it's why they won't allow a hearing to be held. And so nothing close to meeting any standard, even the Secretary of State's own self-confessed standard, has been met in Georgia. All they did is have other Georgia. The way I've described it is you figure out there's a problem with Bernie Madoff's books, and you ask Bernie Madoff to go back and check them for you. And Bernie goes, hey, I double-checked. The books are good.
And I know we've gone over it, but very briefly again, the signature process on the ballots in Georgia. Some people are saying that it was all done properly. We don't know. They haven't allowed any independent party observers ever. Before the election, the Georgia Republican Party asked to be there before the ballots were opened. The Secretary of State's office promised that they would do so, and they would make sure every county did so. They lied. They never delivered on the promise, never allowed them to look at it. Then after the election, they're trying to look at the signatures. They promise after the election that they're going to do so. Then, frankly, Wood and Powell came along. The Secretary of State thought he had an easy excuse, and he was not going to do it. Then the governor asked him to do so, and all he did was a few counties. And again, he didn't allow any monitors. No, he's never allowed any independent party observers. Every election standard requires party observers be present, because otherwise you're asking the crooks to confirm they didn't commit a crime. No shock. Okay, that's what Ben Sass said. Oh, the New York Times said they talked to the election officials who certified this election, and they promised you no fraud occurred. Well, what do you think they're going to say? I mean, that again, it's like asking Bernie Madoff to double check the books. You need somebody else to double check the books, and no one else ever has in any of these states. But the signature audit, some people don't necessarily appreciate that. Is the argument that the signatures on the mail-in ballots were not cross-checked to the signatures on the signature cards, so to speak?
They claim to have done so, but there's been no party observers to confirm it. And again, my point is, if all these signatures clearly match, why are they scared to allow a party observer in? I mean, we'd even proposed you can pick a Democrats expert to go in there. And again, there's only been one place where any signature match check has occurred by any independent monitor. And that is by the Democrats' own expert in Arizona. And they said 11% of the signatures didn't match. In that state, all the Arizona officials said all the signatures matched. When an independent observer looked at them, they said, no, they didn't. At least 11% didn't match, according to the Democrats' own expert from a random sample. So, and that's 30 times more than the margin of victory. So the idea that there's been any meaningful independent monitoring, they're all lying, and they know they're lying, and the president knows they're lying, and that's why he's escalating some of his rhetoric. It's like, do you think I'm just going to get taken for a ride? Do you think you can gaslight me because you gaslit the New York Times, and the New York Times is gaslighting everybody else? That's not how I play. So some of these people are going to wake up. Every senator and every House member who does not vote to object without a commission being present, Cruz has given everybody an easy out, that doesn't object will be primaried in 2022. And if they're up in 2022 or whenever else they're up for senators, and you can guarantee Trump is going to be helping organizing support for that primary opposition, helping fundraise for that primary opposition, and bring attention to that primary opponent. If they don't think that's coming, they haven't really been paying attention to what he's been saying or his whole lifetime. Just go back and listen to him talk to Charlie Rose about that he said really a good thing for his bankruptcy was he learned who he needed to get back at, who were his friends and who were not. First thing he told me on the phone is, this is a very educational process, Bob, for who your friends are. He's going to remember who his friends are, and he's going to remember who weren't. and those who weren't do not have a long political life in front of them.
People want to discuss Pulitzer's testimony. I think that might be something more for the locals board, not for this board, because we have to be limited to legal analysis and not hypothesizing. So,
and again, for all those things, like I hear these phrases that there's been a court hearing. Some of the Kraken suits, the courts have taken pot shots at the evidence because they made basic mistakes in their affidavits. Those suits I don't include those. The president's claims, the election contest, have had very little evidence allowed to be presented, very little evidence allowed to be discovered, very little evidence allowed to be subpoenaed, and no trial has occurred meaningfully in hardly any of them, other than the Arizona and Nevada election contest, which were mini trials where they changed the evidentiary standards midway through. The only key president challenge that election contest has brought was Georgia. That was the big one, and that's the one they're too scared to even hold a hearing in or even assign a judge to.
Okay, amazing. So, I think we're good with that. Let me see what Little Rock says. Robert, is there some organization that we can quote to our senators and reps to help get a primary candidate? We have GOP rhinos in Arkansas. We have emailed them, and they refused to object.
Yeah, we're going to be creating some organizations and some other people helping with that process come February. So to help do that, and I in fact I think locals boards may be ways to organize some of that opposition as a means to do so for candidate independent challenges. But basically, coming up, my role is more of a strategic, the old Greek strategio role. That's the role that I plan on participating in. And there's a wide range of people that are going to be participating in that. The goal of this was, again, Trump's always a parallel track guy. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. The advantage with this was there's no downside to him. Either he won, he was the constitutionally declared winner, or he exposed the systemic fraud both in our election system and in the Republican Party. It was going to be win-win, and the idea that he's just going to go off and retire is nonsense.
Okay, might not be the answer that some people want. People want a more definitive and a more short-term answer, but that's where things stand now. We're going to see what happens this week. So it's the 6th is Wednesday.
Yeah, so I fly to D.C. tomorrow. We'll be there. We'll be meeting with some people. Try to organize the best opposition we can. I think we have the best chance to get the most votes. I mean, in the betting markets, I think they were predicting that only a few senators would object. They were clearly already wrong. There's now 12, 13, 14. My guess is we're going to end up with something more like 30, 35, 40 that object. It will be the largest number that have ever objected in the history of presidential elections other than 1876. And to make sure that Joe Biden if Joe Biden is the president, again, you always have a shot. You never know what's going to happen until it happens. But planning for the worst. The hope for the best is that a constitutional elected president is the one put in on January 20th. But the backup plan is document the fraud, see who your real allies are, see who your real adversaries are, and start to organize on that over the next 4 years, because it tells you if you're ever going to achieve any populist reform in this country, you need more allies in the House, in the Senate, in the state legislatures, as this is exposed, in the courts, state courts and federal courts, local election official level, every level of governance, if you want that kind of populist reform to occur.
Okay, amazing. Now let's see. We should probably get into the tweets now. So how do I phrase this? I know what I think of Lin Wood's tweets, and I know what I think of Lin Wood's frame of mind, and I don't poke fun, and I don't retweet what people say. I genuinely think there might be something. It can only be one of two things. It can be a genuine, some form of a breakdown, genuine, some form of issues. It could be, I guess there's multiple scenarios. It could just be, go out there and say the things that everyone wants you to say for any one of a number of reasons. If you're going to get to the SCOTUS, I don't know. Can you get Roberts? Can you be so outrageous as relates to Roberts in his tweets that he can then ask Roberts to step down from any future case? I mean, I've heard people float that idea. I think it's incredibly unlikely. You can't disqualify a judge by your own conduct. Could that be one of the theories? And how is he not getting kicked off Twitter?
I thought you were going to confess that the reason why you shaved your beard is you found out that Lin Wood was the second coming of Jesus and he was coming for you. No, so you're trying to hide out and say, I don't know that other Viva guy that was ever critical of you.
I shaved my beard.
That Linsanity photo meme. I don't know who that guy is.
No, I shaved my beard because one night I just have an urge to do it, and I do it. I get the fresh air and it feels so great. And then I wake up and look in the mirror and I see Look at this. I got jowls now. These are anger jowls. Look, I'm growing the beard back. It's going back slowly. I just got to exfoliate once in a while. But no, that's not why I shaved my beard.
Of course.
But Robert,
how does he not get
off Twitter?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, no question that he has kind of lost his mind, and the reason why I had been talking about it now for almost a year is because I could see this was coming, and it was coming out of the QAnon world, and that's where it's sourced, and now he's just to understand Wood's mindset. If you know, QAnon was a brilliant psyop. In my opinion, currently, I believe it was a combat because they used role-playing adult fantasy games combined with cult techniques, combined with high-pressure sales techniques. It was very unique. If you compare the Q posting to other forms of anonymous message board posting, it's very different in its style and its approach and its techniques that it applies. And QAnon just sort of went sort of wild with it. But if you are in that world and you're in that fantasy world that you think it's a real world, you think that you're helping because you think that the military is secretly on Trump's side, that the CIA and Secretary of State Pompeo are secretly on Trump's side, that Assange is not in an English prison, but he's actually secretly coordinating with Trump, that there's 200,000 sealed indictments. You know, you think at the funeral presentation for Poppy Bush that the cards that Jeb Bush and everybody got were the secret messages that they were going to be taken out. I mean, people should look that up. There's a guy that has that does fitness views that did one video about this, and it says most watched video ever, like 2.2 million views with people saying, "Oh yeah, these were the secret messages they got at Poppy Bush's funeral." So you know they believe things that are just not sane to believe, frankly, or they're not backed up by independent evidence. But they really believe it. And once you're deep into believing it, you think you're just helping push out the key message to get the president to take action, to get the military to take action, to get the CIA, to help the white hats finally win over the black hats and send everybody off to Gitmo. And that's why he was sitting there, you know, tweeting about how the governor in Georgia is hiding out because the military tribunal's coming for him. And then, of course, it accelerated to Pence. And the reason for this is some of the Q lies were that Pence was going to do something on December 23rd. And when he didn't, they had to come up with an explanation. And so it has to be he's now a traitor. And so he's going to face a firing squad.
Well, yeah, I was going to say without using the words because it's not terminal. I wouldn't even retweet it. And, you know, people have been doing the breakdowns. Do these qualify as threats? You know,
yeah. Well, Linwood may be crazy, but he ain't yet a crook or the thing is a criminal.
There's people throw around the word dog whistle a lot, and they throw around the word dog whistle when you don't even use language within the same ballpark. I don't consider these things to be. I mean, they would not legally pass as threats.
It's called true threats jurisdiction, and the reason why it's called true threats is because people say all kinds of things that have to be protected under the First Amendment, or otherwise the First Amendment is toothless if you interpret any kind of comment or criticism as a threat. So it has to be what's called true threats. And to give people examples of things they said were not true threats, the Klan organizing in Ohio, Brandenburg v. Ohio, where they said they wanted to go and burn and kill a bunch of black people right down the street, they said was not a true threat because it didn't have imminent risk of imminent violence. So it has to be very specific that you're going to commit a certain act of violence and that risk is imminent, that it can actually happen. So, for example, a guy at an anti-war rally in the late 1960s had a gun with him, said, you know, through this sniper, I'm going to look at LBJ next. There's a specific criminal crime statute that criminalizes threats against the president. U.S. Supreme Court said that does not constitute a true threat. That's protected under the First Amendment. So we have a broad scope of what's protected under the First Amendment. This is being lit. This may be going up to the U.S. Supreme Court in an Alex Jones case because they said him being critical of a lawyer was somehow a true threat in Connecticut, such they could throw out all his remedies. It's nonsense, in my opinion. So what he has been saying is not a true threat, because he's not saying anything that has an imminent risk of him committing imminent acts of actual violence against specified people. He's predicting what he thinks will happen because he's living in Q world. But what it is, you know, I've been saying this was a problematic path that was being used to discredit the Trump election challenge, is being used to damage by association Trump personally, being used to keep the senators from being in. Like people said, well, why not be in favor of it? Because anything that helps. This doesn't help. This hurts. Because right now his key audience is the Senate, And it doesn't help if he's associated with that Lynn Wood is saying, that, crazy things about Roberts. Roberts was not on the Epstein plane, folks. That just was always false. I'm not a fan of Roberts either, but he wasn't on the Epstein plane. The Epstein ain't alive. He didn't. Eternal truth. He didn't kill himself, but he is dead.
So hold on just 1 second, though. I've heard people talk about this, and I've heard them when we started talking about the Supreme Court not hearing cases, and everyone's saying that's the reason why. Is the alternative explanation that it was another Roberts because it's a pretty common name that was on the flight logs?
Well, it can't be that one, because the day that A. John Roberts was listed as being on the flight log, Justice Roberts was holding hearings in the Supreme Court. So this was he unfortunately got the president to tweet this out. He said that Ratzenberger's brother worked for China, and he gave a name. Well, Ratzenberger doesn't have a brother with that name, and nor does he have any brother that actually worked for China. It's like you don't even need to go there. But this is the kind of this is how disinformation campaigns work, and they targeted smart, sophisticated people, folks. So a good disinformation campaign will get very smart people on their side. That's why they're called disinformation and psyop campaigns. They work, and they worked on Wood to the nth degree. And he's currently facing confusion because what he thought was going to happen is not happening, because he had bought in so deeply to Q World, and which preyed on his messianic desire of significance. In my view, that's pure speculation, but he gives off vibes like that. And again, he was expecting the president to have John Roberts sent off to military tribunal for Epstein connections, and he was going to be Chief Justice. This is what there's a reason why all of his partners left and then sued him. They weren't eager to do so. No young lawyer wants to get into a suit with someone like Wood, who has a much bigger reputation than any of them did. And these are the people, by the way, who did all the real work for Nick Sandmann. That's why Nick Sandmann came out and was critical finally of Wood, because he was like, I don't want to keep being associated with you when you're saying insane things that hurt the president's cause. And then he gets attacked. Can you imagine all these people that say they love Lynn Wood because he represented Nick Sandmann, then attack Nick Sandmann in the name of Lynn Wood? You need to start checking yourself if you're to that point.
Yeah, it's an amazing clarification on the real threat or the true threat, because you talk about that, and we live in Canada where you literally get ordered to pay a fine by the Human Rights Tribunal for making fun of somebody as a stand-up comedian. Might
be a good bridge to the COVID breakdowns, or if you get too many people in your home on the holidays, the cops will come barging into your door and drag you out.
You saw that. I guess you saw that video, but in Canada, but it's going on in the States as well. And we don't really, we don't have that many lawsuits that are being brought at all compared to the US. What I guess is good. We missed it the last time. Let's do some COVID lockdown lawsuits updates in the States. Since the Supreme Court ruling in New York, has that had a trickle down effect in other jurisdictions?
Yes, a bunch of jurisdictions have struck down discriminatory provisions on churches, and a variety of governors and mayors have modified their provisions to not discriminate against the church. Now, there's still some other provisions that I believe suppress religious rights, but those are yet to be adjudicated by SCOTUS or by anyone else. And then the Stickman case, I think, is still pending before the Third Circuit. A lot of the other cases are pending. I'm looking at bringing cases that will challenge mask mandates on the grounds that they discriminate against the disabled if they're enforced by private enterprise. Look at challenges with Robert Kennedy on vaccines, conditioning vaccines as a condition of employment, a condition of education, particularly these vaccines, where there were some interesting developments on. And I think we may have an announcement on a debate on the vaccines. Do we do that?
Now's a good time, Robert. It is confirmed. It's going to be a week from this Tuesday. Dershowitz versus Barnes on this channel. So I may be a moderator. I'll put on a fancier shirt because I should dress for the occasion. But it's been confirmed. So I'm going to send around the link this week, promote the heck out of it, and we'll have a good discussion. We're going to talk about the forced vaccination debate between Robert and Dershowitz, because I know they don't see eye to eye on this.
We'll see how much I can persuade him. Great respect for his legal mind. My biggest disagreement with him on politics is he defers a lot to the professional class. he's not in favor of elected officials as prosecutors, judges, or the public defenders. Now he makes a very good argument on the public defenders one, but again, everything comes back to always who decides, who has the power. I want the individual to have the power as opposed to the state, and I want ordinary people to have the power as opposed to the professional class. He tends to. There's a word I'm going to blank on it again. Eric Hunley, great unstructured podcast for those people who are out there to follow, to watch, to read. He reminded me of it, but there's a particular and it's people in the comment section will remind me of it. So always comment because it feeds the algorithm. And we got to keep independent channels like this alive in the middle of the big big media, big tech censors that are coming, that have already successfully taken me out by hook or by crook, by whatever means it was, either by non-compliant, refusal to fix it or participating in it in the first place. But there's a sort of mental condition that experts have where they will be skeptical of people within their own expertise, but will defer to other people merely because they purport to be experts. And I think that Dershowitz does that a little bit. But I think, a potential protocol could be interlocutory. You as the mediator, as the sort of arbitrator, and then I could be the judge and sort of be inquisitive of him, and then he could be the judge and be inquisitive of me, and we'll see. I think I can get him at least a little bit off of his current position. May not be able to fully convert him, but I am a Baptist, so I believe in deathbed conversions.
We'll see. It is going to be interesting, and it's going to get to a lot of the questions. There'll be some debate, but it's going to be mostly a lively discussion. The greatest thing is I have the mute button, so I can mute someone who goes on for too long. But no, it's going to be good because it's going to get to a lot of the questions people have been asking about HIPAA violations, forced face mask legality. We're going to get both sides of it because I know more what Dershowitz thinks now.
Oh, he's a huge face mask fan. He loves the face masks. But that will be a good one. I think some of those he was willing to moderate. What I like about Dershowitz, other he's a very brilliant legal mind, is that he's a fair debater in general. He's aggressive. He doesn't lack for confidence or anything else. If uncivil law thinks I'm confident, wait till he hears Dershowitz talk. But he's a fair debater, and he'll often be willing to moderate his position if you persuade him. He's one of the few people that fits into that category.
Is it the Gilman effect, Robert, that you were thinking?
I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And there's another one that starts with a D. There's like two different ones. But yeah, I think that's correct. Corliss Drinkard.
All right.
But I think it'll be a great little debate to have. So we'll have a full discussion of it, fully vet it, and that'll be a good time frame to have it in. And definitely in the new year, there's going to be a lot of cases related to it. I mean, I think all these lockdowns violate core constitutional rights and liberties. And how, to get away with it in the first month, okay. To get away with it a year later, I mean, that's insane. I mean, we basically no longer have constitutional government in most of our country. We don't have the legislature passing laws. We have cops enforcing crazy rules. I mean, when they're enforcing curfews, like in LA, they're grabbing people, throwing them just because they were talking to a cop after curfew time. What's that nonsense?
This is the thing. Like, people are asking me sort of rhetorically, why'd they open the door, the family in Gatineau? First things, like, the regulation allows the officers to give a fine. Why do they? It's not a question of allowing them to force compliance on the spot. So the idea is, okay, give them a fat fine, let them contest it in court, and then let it play out that way. The idea that they come in now and say, not only are we issuing the fine, we are going to forcefully break this up. 8 cops to forcefully break up a party.
Which only increases the spread ratio, right? Like, if you're doing this in the name of decreasing the number of people someone has close contact with that could spread the virus, pulling them out from homes and surrounding them by a bunch of other people doesn't do that.
No, and not just that. You heard the guy in the video gasping for air. I thought he was breathing as a joke, not as a joke. I thought he was doing it as sort of like an act of aggression. He's just being strangled by his shirt by a cop who's not wearing a mask himself. And the Gatineau police say, they showed up as an emergency to back up the other cops, didn't have time to put on masks. Bad answers don't go far. They don't go over well on Twitter, because people are not stupid, and they just point out, yeah, my butt, he couldn't put on a mask as he walks up the stairs. My butt, this guy hit one of the officers in the face multiple times. But we do not take these things to court the way Americans are taking them to court. I think it's a total cultural thing. I don't know how it plays out in the long run. We're a small country, and maybe people are willing to, deal with this for longer than a big country that was founded on fundamental freedoms and an absolute religious value of those fundamental freedoms.
Do you think the French Canadians will be the most likely to resist?
We thus far, French Canada tends to be more defiant.
Because they're like the blue collar, populist version of Canada. When I was up there, a friend of mine is a professor up there. She was like, "These are the Tennesseans of Canada," and I was like, "They like good big boats. They like to fish. They're old school."
I'd say that, but the majority of the province seems to support the measures and the government. The government at the time. So
I think that will keep happening as long as people are terrified. As long as they live more in fear of the virus than they fear their own government. They'll go along with whatever the government does in the name of protecting them. The question is how, but the people who are opposed to it are much more intense, I think, than the people who support it. In other words, I think the people who are opposed to it would be willing to go through a wall to fight it, whereas I think the people who support it won't necessarily even leave their home to support it.
Well, I got an email about a lawsuit that's supposed to, a group of small businesses that are suing the Quebec government, apparently, and I'm going to read the lawsuit, but I was struggling to get out videos consistently over the holidays. Someone says,
you know what they're proposing in New York? They're actually proposing detention camps. They're going to bring back Korematsu. They're going to bring back Jacobson and Buck by having forced vaccinations. And now they're going to bring back Korematsu and actually have detention camps for people. It's like, I mean, who would even think to propose that? First, I thought, okay, it had to be like a fake headline. Then I see, no, it's an actual New York State legislature proposing it. And then I see that it's actually become a proposed law. They're actually proposing a law to send people to detention camps on the name they have a virus.
It's true. When people live in terror, it's easy to get them to do anything in the sense that if they do it, they won't get the virus, and if they get the virus, they must have done something wrong. I mean, that's where it gets to be like a superstitious sort of practice and a superstitious way of viewing all of this. If we saran wrap half an aisle for non-essential items in a store that's open to the general public for essential items, somehow we'll minimize our risks, and people buy onto it.
Apparently, as your son found out, as long as you name the bubble gum essential, it's an essential item.
But bubble gum is not essential. Nothing makes sense anymore. Okay. No. Do we move on to Julian Assange?
Yes, there's that in critical race theory lawsuits.
Oh yeah, well let's save critical race theory for the end. I'll have more questions on that. Julian Assange, we don't need to do the backdrop. For the last little while now, where has he been? He's been
locked up in isolation in one of the worst prisons in the world in London. And the hearing is coming. The judge's order is coming out this week. It's likely that the lawyers for Assange already know it, and they haven't leaked it, but. Put it this way: if it was favorable, it would have been leaked. So is my view. So I've no doubt the judge did not conduct a fair hearing, did not allow the best presentation of evidence, showed bias throughout, has had a history of ruling in favor of the government, rubber stamping the government, an extradition request. So I have no doubt that they're going to order his extradition. Now he still can appeal that, but you don't have the best appellate rights in the UK like you do in the United States, frankly. I had somebody that got real upset because they like the UK legal system, but it's just different, folks. So
we saw that with the Johnny Depp story, but
yes, they're like, oh, this is a great system. Da, da, da. It's like, I mean, you can praise it all you want. I get it. Some people like it, but I prefer a system that gives you an appeal as a matter of right, not just appeal as a matter of permission. Because permissive appeals are often never granted. So and that way, and then a trial court judge knows that they're never going to be looked at or second guessed, or often never going to be looked at or second guessed. So I fear it will be bad news, even though he had many good grounds. So for international extradition under UK law, there's a wider range of objections than say Rittenhouse could make under state law, even though his counsel got confused in that case. The international standards can include due process, can include that you'll be unfairly punished, can include that that you're being targeted for political reasons. It can be that the other court system is not honoring your laws in certain contexts, particularly in extradition. All of those arguments were present in the case of Julian Assange. But I don't anticipate that the court did not allow Julian Assange to even meaningfully meet with his counsel throughout the trial proceedings, often denied him meaningful access to counsel in preparation for the proceedings, didn't allow certain presentation of testimony to take place, was dismissive of other testimony. They admitted again in the extradition proceedings that he's not accused of causing any harm. So a lie that's been spread towards the Trump camp is that Assange caused the deaths of Americans. totally, utterly false. The government admitted that was false in the Chelsea Manning, then Bradley Manning trial, and admitted it again in these extradition proceedings, that there is no allegation that he caused anyone to suffer any harm. In fact, as the Project Veritas tape confirmed, he was giving advance notice to the Secretary of State anytime information of theirs was taken out and leaked improperly outside of their control. So he's been is the number one publisher of whistleblower information in the world, the number one adversary of the deep state in the world, the best advocate for individual human rights against the state in the world, and that's why he's been targeted and harassed and has effectively been locked up really for 7-8 years already between the time he was living in a closet in the Ecuadorian embassy. So if the court was conscientious, the court would find that no extradition should occur. I don't think that will happen. And that will put more pressure on the president to take remedial action. But there are people around the president, particularly like when Lynn Wood is proposing Pompeo. Pompeo is one of the worst members of the cabinet, not one of the best. Pompeo is a deep state actor. Yeah, that tells you how QAnon is a disinformation campaign. That you're saying Pompeo is coming to the rescue. It's like, oh my goodness, that's like Darth Vader coming to save you.
I just know that people are going to think that you have a personal vendetta against Q, which I suspect you might for not ideological reasons, but rather practical reasons as relates to what has gone down in the context of this election. But whenever you go, I hear people saying, he's on Q again. Now, but here's a question.
I think people underappreciated how successful it was being. The way Lynn Wood was able to develop so much influence. Q influenced the Flynn camp, influenced the Sidney Powell, and it was built up so that people really thought it was a good idea to bring in the U.S. military, when the military was never going to come to Trump's aid anyway, even if you believe that. That was always a trap. And so I think people underestimated how successful Q had been as a psyop. Literally has millions of followers. Almost all the information that people are seeing that's on the Dominion side is being pushed out by Q, and it often ends up being disinformation. And so it was meant to hurt the president, not help him. Meant to undermine the Trump populist movement, not aid it. Trying to divert it into becoming a new militia movement. It's a bad idea, and nothing about it's been a good idea. That's why I increased my criticism to the extent I saw it was being successful and effective, and that's it. But contrary to what Q has led people to believe, Assange has been in a terrible prison condition for the last year, and I hope the president steps to the plate and pardons him before whatever happens. Just step up to the plate and pardon him. Period. It's been long enough.
And now this is the issue, because I guess some people might say, wait for him to get extradited and then pardon him in the U.S., where you can, give him.
Well, the Q nonsense that was pitched was, we need to get him here so that he can meet up with Epstein and rat everybody out. That's the kind of nonsense they are pushing. If Q is not pardoned by January 20th, and the president is not named Trump on January 21st, Assange has no hope. Because Biden and those people want to put him away and use him as an example to the world that you never contest or challenge deep state power without facing grave personal consequences for it.
And I'm just going to correct you because you accidentally said Q. If Q is not pardoned and not Assange. So
I'm sorry. Yeah.
For anybody who's thinking, because I've heard the discussion, I've heard the theory, let him get extradited, pardon him here, and that way you can give him security. Whereas pardon him in Britain, you never know where he goes. There's not enough time for that. Period. No. The only thing is now a pardon, regardless of what happens in the UK, and then if he gets extradited, it becomes moot. I guess they wouldn't even render the decision, or they render it, but he's been pardoned, so no more extradition.
They have to withdraw at that point their extradition request.
Okay, and I just want to bring this one up because I like this. This here in LA, the cops are now arguing that they have to follow orders so they can feed their family while they prevent business owners from feeding theirs, and this is how the government state basically eventually corners everybody into certain conduct. Everybody's got to, feed their family, and everybody's got to do what they got to do to survive, even if they don't believe that they should be doing it. And the more dependent on the state everyone becomes in all aspects of their lives, the more the state gets to turn the screws of its monopoly to compel behavior. It's terrible.
We're facing the greatest the challenge to the Constitution in our history in 2021.
Okay, we'll see where that goes. So Assange we covered. Now let's get into the critical race theory, because I didn't do my homework on this one, Robert. I didn't have the time, and I'm sorry, teacher.
Oh, there's also the Twitter defamation suit.
Okay, well, we'll see what we're getting close on time, and I hear some madness upstairs. But the critical race theory lawsuit. Okay, now I think I know of it in broad brushstrokes, but I think you're going to have to inform the audience better than me, and I'll see if I have any questions. What is going on in the critical race theory lawsuit? There's
multiple suits being brought. Some in California's class actions, but the most recent one was brought in Nevada. And what it is essentially it's challenging critical race theory. Is now being taught everywhere by government agencies, by government actors, by schools where they're indoctrinating kids in it. And critical race theory actually originated out of the legal academy. And they overtly said from day one, they're against the Constitution, they're against equal rights, they're against these things. That critical race theory is about deconstructing the world in terms of race and empowering people based on their racial identity, and disempowering other groups based on their racial identity. It's open discrimination, in my view, is what it is. Just open, overt discrimination, but in the name of protecting the oppressed from the oppressor.
Now, but I only began to hear of critical race theory because I saw the acronym CRT. I don't even understand the name of it. I don't understand the theory. Is it critical of a race, or is it critical of all races? I don't even understand the
critical of all institutions based on a theory of the role race has played in those institutions. So It's very like, take Foucault, take Derrida, take deconstructionism, take a certain form of Marxism, sort of integrate it and just apply it and think of the whole world as white bad, black good, and that our institutions are themselves prejudiced. Institutional racism derives in part from critical race theory. The theory is that the institution of the church is inherently racist. So if you're part of the church, for that part, there's not everyone who believes that and within that theory, but there are those who do, particularly including the founders of BLM, who have their personal vendetta against the black church, especially. That's why they're anti-church. That's why the Black Lives Matter's sort of mantra is critical race theory. So, take down the nuclear family, because all of these institutions are embedded with racial oppression, and you have to overthrow these institutions entirely. You have to burn your history. And so that's where it shares things in common with Marxism and certain kind of leftist ideologies and certain forms of utopianism and the like, is that you got to burn the past. It's a very French Revolution mindset about history. It's sort of, the best criticism of that, of course, was Edmund Burke, and it would apply very well to a lot of this. Or you could read a book like Nixon Agonistes by Gary Wills, which applies it actually to Nixon in a very creative and unique way, but gets into these broader theories of what true conservatism is and how progressivism is a threat to it. But CRT is part of that. What's amazing is, I'll give you an example. I was in Tennessee, and I got good friends there who are pulling their kid out, youngest child out of public school, because all he's been taught from the time he's been there in first grade is all about racial oppression and slavery and whatnot. And I was like, what? It's like, this is Signal Mountain. So, and this is getting everywhere. It's massive indoctrination of an idea that says 1775 was bad, that says everything that, that our American Revolution was bad. America's founders are bad. It's part of the idolatry and ideology that tears down statutes, that says that, in fact, that everything connected to Americans' history needs to be torn down. America's economic institutions need to be torn down. America's cultural institutions need to be torn down, except for the university, where all these people are getting their government-paid checks in part, of course. But that's what it is, and it pervades. But what it is it's teaching racial prejudice and discrimination in public institutions, now to the point where they're going to, I had a potential client inquire, say that, by the way, I've been, I now know I will be discriminated against in the vending process because the state has announced it's only going to give favorable treatment if it's a minority-owned business. You're seeing Uber talk about that. You're seeing Yelp talk about that. And all of these things are racial discrimination and illegal. And so what it is, they try to change the laws in California to allow it to happen. Even in California, they rejected these critical race theory ideas as applied to the law, and saying, no, we're going to keep our laws prohibiting discrimination in place.
Well, now that you mentioned it, where was it? Wisconsin, where they mandated the face masks, but created an exemption for African Americans. I don't know if it was Wisconsin or Georgia. Was it Wisconsin?
I think it was Wisconsin. And there's a bunch of places that were. I think Portland was talking about doing that. A bunch of other places were. So I think that what needs to happen is all of these laws. So people are now starting to challenge it. They're starting to sue school districts. They're starting to sue state bodies because Trump did an executive order saying this is illegal, this critical race theory nonsense. Christopher Wallace then lied about it in the debate and pretended it wasn't critical race theory and was just preaching non-discrimination when it preaches discrimination and prejudice. And people are now that they know the executive order will probably be ineffective if Biden gets in on January 21st, they're bringing federal civil rights suits against any state government that's involved in this at all. And they're going to start bringing discrimination claims against employers who are involved in this because there needs to be a full legal battle, because once they lost if you couldn't in California get the public to go along with it, you're not going to get any state to agree to this. So as long as you get past the bias of the judicial system, you should be a jury is going to say this is nonsense, and they have no interest in it. And that includes white jurors, black jurors, Hispanic jurors, Asian jurors. They all agree nobody likes this nonsense outside of a small group in the left academy that believes in this insanity, ideological insanity.
Which now that I think about it, which university was it that admitted to institutionalized racism? And then I think it was Trump who said, well, if you're admitting to institutionalized racism, give us back our grant money because it was given to you, or give back federal subsidies because they were granted to you on the basis of non-discrimination.
We've had part of that in Harvard. Yale's currently being sued because they openly discriminated against Asian students. In order to get a certain quota of other students in. So then the court excused it up there. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, it was stuff that my view on this is very simple. If you change the races that are accused of being discriminated against, and you would get a different opinion from the court, then you don't have an honest court decision. You don't have an honest application of the law. And I have no doubt that if it was if you change Asians to the black students being discriminated against, I have no doubt the court would have ruled in a different direction. So there is racial prejudice is unconstitutional, period. There's no exception.
And apparently we've been corrected. It was Oregon, and that sounds much more familiar than Wisconsin. But it was a state that was mandating face masks and had an exemption based on race. So the state.
Well, people confuse Madison and Eugene all the time. The movie Animal House they think is about Madtown, but it's actually about Eugene.
American history class should only consist of the movie The Patriot. Just play it every day and throw out The National Treasure every 3 weeks too.
That's a great film. Both of those are great films, and both National Treasure films are great. Celebrating our history, like books like 1775 by Kevin Phillips are great. Books about James Ellroy about how history really works behind the scenes, behind the curtains, also very good. A lot better than a lot of the insanity that's going on in our universities. But what's amazing is how much it's infiltrated corporate advertising. It mirrors and mimics the popular front strategy of the left in the 1920s and 1930s to co-opt the institutions that influence the mind. Newspapers, media, entertainment, the academy, human resources departments, and employers, advertising departments. If you control how people think, you can control the world. And they've done so at rapid pace in the past decade.
But now, so I haven't read the lawsuit, but what is going to be the legal basis of the lawsuit? They're going to sue the institution over the sorry, what's the word I'm looking for when they teach you stuff? The curriculum. They're going to sue the institution over the curriculum on the basis that the curriculum itself is rooted in some form of discrimination?
Yes, and that they're preaching discrimination. So they're encouraging, incentivizing, and rewarding discrimination, that they're going to be, and that sometimes the policies themselves are discriminatory. Sometimes they form a harassing atmosphere. So people know about sexual harassment, but also harassment based on race is illegal. So any form of harassment based on a particular trait or status is illegal under federal law. So so you have the constitutional provisions, the federal provisions, in some cases state law provisions. So it depends on which ones it is, but that's where and they're starting to come up with creative ways to challenge it.
It's interesting. Okay, I'm gonna follow that. I'll break down one of those lawsuits because it is very interesting. Let me just get this off here. Okay, it's amazing. It is. Yeah, well, I'll do a breakdown of one of the lawsuits. It'll be hopefully a shorter one.
And it'll be an ongoing topic. It's the ways of trying to remedy some of the crazy things that are happening in our institutions and academies. And it's kind of like, to bridge in briefly to the Twitter suit.
Yeah, let's do it.
So yeah, what happened is the guy who discovered the Hunter Biden laptop, who reported it, is suing Twitter because Twitter originally refused to allow the New York Post story about his about his discovery of Hunter Biden's laptop to run on the grounds that he had hacked it. And so his point is that, Twitter lied about him. And so it's not a Section 230 suit. It's not about Twitter controlling the content on its site. It's about Twitter saying, if Twitter had just suppressed the New York Post without giving that disclaimer, then he wouldn't have had a suit. He had a suit because Twitter said the reason we're suppressing this is hacked information. And he said that was lying about me. because everybody knew that was about me. So he's filed a very good. Now they have a big damages claims, and that doesn't usually go anywhere. But I don't think he can prove $500 million in damages. But I think it's a good place to start when Twitter is using these disclaimers, making specific statements. They're getting into a different territory. It's one thing for Twitter to be effectively a publisher by what they censor, suppress, and support and reward. It's a totally different ballgame when they start making specific statements about people's posts or about people or about individuals or businesses. Then they are defaming, and Section 230 does not protect them. And so this is, I think, is the beginning of a sequel of attacks that will occur against Twitter for doing this, because they've gotten, and Facebook, this is part of Candace Owens' theory that you went through, where Facebook, it's the next step to her suits. Her suits right now are on the Facebook fact checkers, but then it's going to go to Facebook depending on what defenses are raised.
Well, I mean, the other thing is, it's going to. I hope they've read through Clarence Thomas's Supreme Court decision, because he basically laid out the argument that they should be making to say that none of this, when you do this specific conduct with specific tweets, it is no longer about moderating the content on the platform. It is about now editorializing it, and this may be the decision to get there, and it may make it sort of academic for 230 reform. Maybe the courts are going to come in and reform it themselves or interpret it properly, but they are obviously going to raise the 230 defense and try to have this dismissed on a motion to dismiss.
Yes, and I think that I think they'll survive. I think the defamation case will survive a motion to dismiss, or should. We'll see when it ultimately happens. And if it didn't, then it does set up very good appellate grounds, because clearly that would be a misapplication of Section 230 to allow Twitter to now defame people openly and overtly. And so we'll see how it translates. But very good suit, and good to see it start suits like that to start as part of the legal fight back against big tech. And it's another good reason why Hawley objected. Hawley objected because part of the issues he's going to document in the record is that big tech's suppression campaign and Zuckerberg, this was one of the questions that people asked on the locals board, Zuckerberg selectively spending money under a guise of a charity to influence how elections were conducted in a bunch of key swing counties and key swing states that disproportionately favored Democratic voting methods, basically was a way for illegal campaign contributions to take place and occur. And real illegal, illicit election influence happened in this election. And it happened in large part enabled by big tech, making effectively donations in favor of one candidate outside of the limits and without disclosing it as such. And I think Hawley is going to be part of detailing that in the congressional record, which is good to continuing to build the court of public opinion for change and reform in that area.
It's going to be good. And by the way, I've got my homework, but that's another one that I'm breaking down. I've read through it very quickly, but it's an amazing thing. It's what we've been saying for a while. This is not content moderation. This is actual curation, and they are saying things through what they do, and they're implicitly saying things through what they don't do. And this guy, can you imagine? You have your life ruined just because of who crosses your path. And after that, which intelligence agencies cross your path? It's an amazing thing. It's out of a movie. So we're gonna come back to this one also, because this is also the blueprint for what Clarence Thomas was saying. It should be the next case to be heard by the Supreme Court, because undoubtedly, in my mind, they're going to raise 230. I think they'll succeed at the lower levels, but it'll get up to the higher levels. And if it's nothing else than Supreme Court adjudicating on whether the 230 defense applies under certain circumstances, that will be the outcome of the case. Okay, we got Bugor says, snitching on neighbors. Where have I read that before? Oh yeah, something obscure. An author was wrote, and there was a Cleopatra super chat. In fact, let me see if I can bring up a few that I missed. We've covered tonight's topics, right? Pretty much.
I believe so.
Okay, so we got here. Cleopatra says, Robert, thank you for saying that about having the most senators objecting. Praying Mike Pence does the right thing. Whomever said boomers were not involved in the internet, I want you to know that I worked for IBM in 1966. Those were computer hardware, not software. That's Cleopatra, another one of the awesome super chats. Thank you very much, Cleopatra.
And that was back when IBM ruled the world. I mean, they dominated. I mean, people thought nobody would be able to replace IBM. They were the computer industry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just looking for more super chats that I missed. Here's another one. Jonathan Westcott from way back. Questions for y'all both. For those good police officers still in departments violating the Constitution with COVID enforcement and otherwise, what can they do besides disobeying orders, if anything?
I mean, I take or give credit to the sheriffs and police officers who are refusing to enforce these rules because they're not constitutionally passed laws. And the only oath they take, when you take an oath, you don't take an oath to do whatever the governor or mayor tells you what to do. You take an oath to abide by the Constitution. And many of these edicts are not even passed by the legislatures at all. In fact, in most states, they're not. And so I'm glad that a lot of the sheriffs and police officers stood up and said, look, we're not enforcing this law. It's not even clear to us it's a constitutional law. And their duty is to the Constitution. Their duty is not to whatever politician happens to be elected. But I think increasingly they're forced. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say it's whatever, governor or politician happens to sign their paycheck. It's not like, because they will face sanctions for doing their job, even if they're upholding the Constitution. Where is the authority to sanction, as in authorize that type of constitutional conduct versus punish them? Because they know they'll only get punished. And
yeah, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, right now the system is breaking down because ultimately it's up to individual police officers and sheriffs and members of the law enforcement to see that the Constitution is enforced. If not, the Constitution won't be enforced. And if judges turn a blind eye, then that reinforces the Constitution not being reinforced. And right now, that's what's happening. It's happening. What happened in the election is a micro version of what's been happening over the last year in the COVID context. And at some point, they've got to start recognizing this is deeply problematic behavior. They're discrediting the institutions, and they're radicalizing large groups of people who, ultimately will have no choice but to engage in civil disobedience in order to try to protect their ability to make a living and to defend the way that they live.
All right. And now there was one other question before we should finish up on the bar complaint, because I don't think we should go long. Yeah. But I think we do have to cover that. IT, right at the beginning of the chat, before the stream even started, said, is there any international law, or are there any international laws on elections? If so, what are they? There's no law that touches American elections except American law, correct?
I mean, effectively. I mean, obviously, the United Nations could always make a declaration about an election and could choose to recognize or not recognize a government. Other governments can choose that same thing. I think the president of Mexico, he may still have not yet even. He may have come around, but he was not verifying the election because he was the victim of major election fraud himself. It was portrayed in the first season of Narcos Mexico, not the first season of Narcos overall, but the Narcos Mexico goes into detail about how they manipulated the vote using machines, actually, in that context, the way they counted the ballots. So that's always been sort of the cinematic approach. And then they also went and destroyed some ballots and made sure some votes counted and some votes didn't, so on and so forth. But there's no effective. Again, it all comes down to who decides. So if Pence decides not to exercise power he may have, then it doesn't really matter. If he does, then it's the fact that he decides. All the law really is about who has the power, who decides. At the end is my old first class of law school with my criminal law professor, and he's like, "We want to be governed by law, Mr. Barnes, not by people." And I was like, who do you think writes the laws, enforces the laws, and adjudicates the laws? The invisible man? That was my early sign of lack of respect for authority. But it's true. I mean, ultimately it's people who govern us, and so it comes down to what the Congress says. It comes down to what the courts say. It comes down to what executive enforcement officials say. So that's really ultimately where the law derives. It's trust and confidence that those people will follow certain principles, and only to the degree that they do we have a system governed more by law than by the whim of man.
All right, and that is actually the perfect segue into the last subject, which we'll broach tonight. First of all, everybody hit the thumbs up thingy, the like, so we can get to 8,000. Doesn't matter though. Okay, that bar complaint in Arizona. Okay, a lot of people are asking, and I sort of made it as a joke. There's not a snowball's chance in summer that the Bar Association would reprimand or sanction the lawyers who drafted that bar letter.
Oh, sanction the lawyers who drafted the letter?
Am I biased? Am I wrong? Or is that bar letter to the bar, that bar complaint about the 21 Trump lawyers in Arizona, not the biggest load of hogwash I've ever?
I mean, no doubt. But the risk is that the bar associations are becoming sometimes they're they're run by the bar. Sometimes they're run by the Supreme Court of the state. Sometimes the Supreme Court delegates it to the bar. So it all varies by state. But they've been politically wet. It's overwhelmingly professional class people who hate anybody associated and affiliated with Trump or Trump world. And that's the risk that you face. So that because they're so politicized, the question has been an open question. When will they start to weaponize their control over your licensure as a means of punishing political dissidents or those who advocate for them? There's a history of it. I mean, in the tax protester world, a lawyer I knew, Jeffrey Dickstein, he was sent to prison and disbarred, frankly, for conduct that was entirely ethical and professional, in my view. So it was because he was a dissident lawyer. He was targeted. And that's been true going way back. Clarence Darrow, I think, faced 2 or 3 criminal trials on contempt and other charges based on trumped up cases and claims. So I hope that there's definitely nothing unethical any of those lawyers have done that warrants any form of sanction or discipline.
It's not even that, but I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, because I would imagine by virtue of the fact that the judge didn't reprimand them. I mean, I know the threshold is different, and it's not because a judge didn't sanction behavior that it's not potentially unethical.
Mm-hmm.
They made it through the courts. The courts rendered their decisions. How does an observer, an uninterested lawyer, now say that the courts effectively say that they lied to the courts when the courts are not even sanctioning that type of conduct of their own? And do they even know what happened in the trials?
It's always, well, I mean, I would say this part. It's mostly on the left today. It's always been part of the establishment's toolbox to try to use every tool they have, whether it's control over your employment, control over your education, control over your income, control over your personal freedom, control over your occupation, to use every tool they have to weaponize it against you if they don't like you or like what you do. But the left has made it an art form. They just do it across the board. Oh, you said something we don't like, you have to be fired. It's part of cancel culture. And the new extension and expansion of cancel culture was going to be going after your license. And that can be a barber's license. That can be a plumber's license. It won't stop at lawyers. It won't stop at accountants. It won't stop at doctors. They will go after everybody who politically disagrees. You're going to have to agree with the political narrative, or you won't be able to even be able to practice your chosen profession. That's where they want the world to go to. Because most of you notice that letter failed to document clear evidence of anything unethical. It was a lot of rhetoric and hot air.
You can't summarize 10 cases in a few pages, and it was just such 50,000-foot overview of what happened. And I mean, the part that really got me was when they said the judge in one of the cases,
the judge did some illegal stuff too. You should go after him. He even allowed them to have a hearing. This is outrageous.
It is. I just don't understand how anyone gets that letter and doesn't say, you guys are idiots and you guys might be the ones. Like, can the lawyer?
That should be the case, but most of the state bars all will be in agreement with these people. They're all Trump haters. They're lefty types. They jump to it. The state bars are the ones that cover up for corrupt prosecutors, cover up for corrupt government lawyers, and cover up for corrupt corporate lawyers. While they target, I mean, as Jerry Spence famously said, the gentlemen of the bar only defend the gentlemen of the bar. And he meant that in the old top hat way. He has some righteous criticisms. I'll include that someday, some show in the background as one of the key books, is one of his great books, one of his older books about how the legal system really operates. And it was hold no bars attack. But that's the nature of this. I mean, but yes, it shouldn't go anywhere because it's insane. And it's so overtly politicized. They should have, now I think Wood and Powell face higher risk because they got ensnared into submitting some problematic affidavits. But like Nate thought that because the Delaware state law allows if you're admitted in Delaware, they can punish you for anything you do anywhere. But that's not how pro hoc rules work. The way pro hoc rules work is that you're subject to Delaware rules in that court proceeding, because there are major due process problems and jurisdictional problems with one state trying to regulate other conduct from other states by lawyers licensed in other states for those cases. So as you pointed out, the proper forum to adjudicate any supposed ethical breach in front of a court is that court, not anyone else. And if it's outside of the court proceedings, then it should be a client or actual injured party bringing the claim, not adversarial counsel, not people who dislike your advocacy. I mean, I've been targeted on this nonsense for decades. So it just goes with the territory. They're just escalating it to a whole new level where they look at every single tiny thing you've ever done and they kind of try to come after you for it.
And I say in the limited, I never dealt with ethical complaints, even when people approach me, because it's
you're too nice.
No, if someone says, come represent me in an ethical complaint, you know damn well you're going to be the object of an ethical complaint. And it's not a question of how much the file's worth. It's just a question of how much the headache is worth. Because when you deal with people who file ethical complaints, they do it against everybody. Now, and so when I'm saying, like, you know, I would never file an ethical complaint in the first place, because you know darn well all that's going to happen is the lawyer you filed one against is going to file one against you. So, you know, my two questions. Are the lawyers going to file their rebuttal ethical complaints or just not waste their time? And I thought these complaints remain confidential. So how did this one get public? Unless it's a different law there.
So the internal process of the complaint is confidential in terms of the state body. But if you file a complaint, you can publish that fact. And anything you receive from them, you as an individual can publish. Only the state is supposed to keep things confidential. So I'm assuming this didn't come from the state. I'm assuming it came from the lawyers who filed the complaint. They can they can distribute it and publish anything they want. Now, their risk is that if they say something defamatory, it may not be considered part of a judicial proceeding, if you publish something that has to be confidential by the state. Other lawyers have made this mistake in the past, where they're going after somebody and they lie about them. They're like, "Oh, I sent that to the state bar. That's immune. That's part of that's privileged." And it's like, yeah, if the state bar had leaked it rather than you, but it's confidential, so you're out of luck. So the courts go back and forth on how they interpret those rules. That's part of the potential Wood and Powell defenses, is that these were things done in anticipation of or as part of litigation. Kind of ironic, because Wood is suing his former partners for defamation on grounds of what they said in court. He's going to lose that case. He's going to owe their legal fees, but as part of the anti-SLAPP action that they brought. But that in general is part of the protection, but it's limited if in fact you disclose something that's otherwise confidential.
All right. And with that said, everybody, this was a good one. I mean, at the very least, now we've had more than half of this stream not election related, even though I know people are dying to, continue to hear about it. We're going to enter, hopefully, a new world in a couple of weeks where we can go to some juicy, meaty lawsuits, like lawyers complaining about lawyers, Twitter defamation.
This week will be a very eventful week. Next week we'll have and we'll start doing we'll let people on Locals Board decide, some midweek streams where we only take questions, like a 1 hour kind of Wednesday live stream where we only take questions and chat questions, no set topic list, to expand it as we expand what we're doing here and elsewhere, since I won't be too busy with Twitter much anymore.
I'm going to go back and remind Jack and everybody that, you still have a problem that needs to be addressed, because it's kind of serious. But if everybody, by the way, who's on Twitter, go retweet to Jack, because, it's a very shocking thing to see someone have a voice silenced. And it's not everybody who has a reach to actually make that silence louder. So let's do that. Week from Tuesday, Dershowitz Barnes debate. I'm going to get that out this week. And we'll do a live stream next week regardless, and we'll have news. And if there's massive news this week, we'll see if we do a midweek stream. Everybody, thank you very much. Robert, actually, you know what? We need one final word of optimism from you, and then I'll sign off.
So we'll find out this week. We're going to see something that's historically unprecedented in the scope and the scale of the objections made to a presidential election. It's all going to be on C-SPAN. I'll be there in D.C., and so we'll see. And I think at a minimum, we'll document the record. I think it will be the highest number of objections made by senators and House members to any presidential election in American history. Open question whether it gets over the top. It's a long shot, may not get there, but even if it doesn't, we establish an important record and precedent that builds to what reforms need to happen going forward. And there's a lot of ways that's going to be happening in the new year, building opposition to the lockdowns, building a new political movement, building the means and tools and supporting those means and tools of a new movement, whether it's locals or elsewhere. And for anybody who wants to comment or have questions about this, other than commenting below, I will be I'll put up a post to the link to this at the top of the Locals Board, and we'll be responding on and off over the next 2 hours at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, where I'll be for the near short term, given Jack has locked me out of the house.
All right. And I don't know if anybody can hear the kid screaming upstairs, but there is a kid screaming upstairs. Everybody, have a good rest of the weekend. We will be in touch on social media next week, and enjoy. Rest up. We'll talk soon. Robert, thank you very much as always.